back. So what are we going to be doing here? So this is a problem that Notarize is facing, and probably lots of people are facing, which is why we want to open source it. But essentially what I want to do is I want a way to quickly, efficiently, and declaratively run requests. That's basically what I want. So I'm imagining an API like this. So let's actually open up maybe some like file or something. So I'm imagining an API like this. So you say something like, let's make this a little larger too. Does this work? I'm not sure. No, it doesn't. I know how to do it. Oh, here we go. It's a little too small. All right, that feels better. So I'm imagining something like this. You say something like, oh, I want an A, and that's like some request, right? And for now, we'll just put like URL 1. And then I also want a B, you know, and that's like URL 2. And then I want a C, which is request, you know, I don't know, URL 3. Like that's fine, right? But what's actually interesting that's important is that like sometimes requests, so like if you're using this for automation, like let's say you're using this for tests, or you just want to do like maybe some like quick setup for yourself, like you want to quickly get, you know, your application in some state before you like, you know, do some manual testing or whatever you want. Like basically you want to, you know, do some server-side requests in some order to like achieve that state. And so like maybe what I really desire here is the resource C, right? Like, so maybe this is some post request that, you know, makes a resource. And for me to properly do this request, you know, actually maybe it's something like this, right? And so what I mean by that is like, oh, in the same way that, you know, you guys know make, right? Like make is like not a great program for a bunch of reasons, but if you've ever used make, you write things like this, right? You say A, and to make an A, I don't need anything, right? And then this is do request, right? And then to get B, again, you just like do request. And then to make a C, you actually need A and B, and then do request, you know, given A and B, right? This is like the most basic thing in the world, right? So what I want is we're going to write a library where you know, we kind of want to write something like this, but like a little bit more programmatic, like a little bit more JavaScript-y so that it can be scripted, I guess. But most importantly, you can specify how to make a resource, you know, so you write the recipe, right? Like how to do the thing, and you would specify any dependencies of doing that thing. And then in the same way that make does it, it just will automatically, like, you know, produce those resources in the most parallel, efficient way possible, right? So for instance, in this case, we know that we can make A and B at the same time, right? And then we can't make C until both A and B are done. That seems pretty reasonable, right? So I think that the primary goal of this stream is like to maybe like get something going that looks a little bit like this, but this is we need something probably a little bit more rigid as far as an API is concerned. And then, because, you know, like I can't write this function, right? Like I can't know if these two things are satisfied necessarily. This is also a synchronous API, which we don't really want for various reasons in JavaScript. So it's going to be something like this. It's going to be somewhere between this and this. Okay, seems pretty reasonable, right? All right, let's see here. So I'm just going to delete all this stuff. So the question is where to get started, right? I guess before we go any further, so I had already started a little bit of kind of the boilerplate stuff for this particular project, but I didn't really get that far because, you know, stuff. But if you've ever used JavaScript, like this is pretty normal stuff. The only thing that's a little bit weird here is this is using a project called Lerna, which I've never actually used before. It's like a new thing for me. But essentially what it allows you to do is you have this giant repo, and you have, instead of like one Git repository being one npm module, you have one Git repository, and then inside of like packages, you have like each one of these directories is a npm dependency. Why this is advantageous is that means we have like one repo, like one mono repo to sort of manage all this stuff, and we can like very easily with this Lerna tool, it's like a binary that you can execute, you know, run things in all of the packages, like for instance build all the packages, or you know, publish all the packages to npm or whatever. And the reason I need several packages is, like the way I'm envisioning it right now, and this might have to change at some point, is that, you know, there's this sort of core library which is like the make, right? Like before we were writing make, you know, it's the thing that makes this graph of dependencies and, you know, knows how to resolve those dependencies. And then since at Notarize we use GraphQL, yeah, whatever. Since we use GraphQL, I was imagining that the API we write an API to make GraphQL requests a little bit easier on top of this. So like this would be a dependency of, or this would be a dependency of that. But you could imagine that we could put like other packages in here for other kinds of things that need to be resolved in some certain order, right? Like if you had like an HTTP, it's like a plain REST API, you might want like a REST package, you might want you know, something to interact with maybe AWS, right? Or I don't know. Like you could even, what I was kind of envisioning is you could even put a package in here for like doing profiling. So for instance, if you wanted to make your series of requests a little bit more user-like, you could put like delays between requests. So like a dependency of this request is like a 300 millisecond delay, or you know, all kinds of stuff. There's various ways in which this can manifest, right? Okay. So, I was talking about boilerplate. So I have this like Lerna package thing, and then it's kind of nice because what it allows you to do is you can sort of install some like node dependencies at the top level for like development stuff. So if we take a look at you know, what's in here, like we have like some dev dependencies like our testing tools and our build tools and TypeScript, and these are like all the same packages for all the sub dependencies, right? All these packages have the same top level dependencies, so I don't have to like manage each package individually, which can be quite cumbersome. Okay, so tests are failing, but that's fine. At least we're running. So it's kind of nice because for each package you can just like run them all in parallel, which is pretty nice actually. Oh right, so if I say yarn build here, we wanted to verify that generate empty bundle. Yeah, that's fine. Packages, graph, right. So this guy right here, this is what we wanted, which is great. So this is if in case you're wondering what's going on here, this is so that when we build the projects and actually publish them to NPM, this will ensure that the type definitions go with the project. And the idea here is that like somebody downloads this and they're a TypeScript consumer, they'll automatically get all the type definitions, so their autocomplete and stuff will work. Tests were made to fail. That's correct. That is 100% correct. All right, so we're done here. We need to get out of here. All right, so I'm thinking that we can just work on one thing right now, which is, so we need this like core API, and we need like a graph, and we need a way to, I guess, what do they call that? There's a word for this. Graph sort, is it like, yeah, here we go. This thing. Here's a wiki. Oh look, there's even like some pseudocode. Maybe I can just like copy this. I was gonna do it this way, but there's actually this thing. Is this more efficient? It's from 1962. I've never heard of this person. Oh, and there's a parallel algorithm. Ooh, fancy. Oh, there's also one additional constraint on this. So I can't like copy this exactly because there's something else that I want to achieve, which is that if we go back to this, let me pull up a test here so that we can have some. What I also want to happen is sometimes it's not just that you need an A and a B resource. It's that you need to parameterize the exact, like, it's like B prime versus B prime prime. And what I mean by that is when we use a B to produce a C, it's like we may need to like make a special kind of B, or like essentially what I'm saying is like we need some way for C to, when it declares B as a dependency, we need some way for C to essentially kind of like pass parameters to like this recipe. And so like this is really important in GraphQL land because like while producing a B resource is like pretty straightforward, it's just like making what they call a mutation in GraphQL land. Like the actual data that you get back from that mutation is like it's super optional. Like everything is like you just pick what you want. And so it may be the case that B wants to, or I'm sorry, when C is making itself, it may want to know something special about B, so it has to sort of tell this request, oh, make sure in the response, in that resource that you create, like make sure you tell me like maybe some ID of some, some resource somewhere, or maybe it's important for C to know like the title of B or whatever. So maybe if we write this out, it can be expressed a little bit easier. So like maybe if we have mutation, create A, it doesn't really matter, right? And create A, it takes like a name, hello. And so this is just like a made up thing, but mutation, create B, create B, and so maybe this is like ID of parent, like I don't know, I'm just making this thing up, and this would be like a.id. So if we write something like this, we need A to tell us its ID. So like in this example, B has a dependency on A, and we're going to do mutation, create B, and here we're doing A, mutation, create A. So that's what this would look like in make, but my point is that like actually the mutation that we want A to do here has to be like a little bit parameterized by B, because like we're saying like, it's like, oh no, we need like A with ID. And so the real mutation we would do is something like this, right? Like we need this part to be somewhat dynamic. So like, I don't know, you know, in more JavaScript-y land, it would be something like this, like with, and then like, you know, ID. Maybe it's like that actually. But, you know, we don't really want to write it this way exactly, but you kind of get the idea, right? Hopefully. More primes. John, if you could just like be a heckler, it'd be great. If you could just come in every stream and just make jokes, be super happy. So A depends on the result of B. I think it's the other way. To like properly create B, we're saying we need to know, we need to make the result of A slightly different. Like, it might be more concrete if we like, if we came up with, I mean, this is helpful for me too. That's why I'm like going through this exercise, right? So like, let's make this like a little bit more concrete, right? So like in this case, I need to spell mutation correctly. So let's think of like a real world dependency, right? So like you need, like all I can think of are notarized examples, and I don't want to use those because like they're like notarized domain objects and like they're not gonna make any sense to you. We could use shoebox examples, right? So what would be an example of a shoebox example? So I think what a good example might be like create stakeholder. And so in GraphQL, I'm not sure how familiar you are with this, but basically this is just a name, right? Okay, so the name of this mutation is create stakeholder, and we're going to do a write to the database, which is like, you know, create stakeholder, and the stakeholder, you know, object is going to come back to us, right? So this is going to, you know, write in it, I'm going to put like John as the name, right? And so like, you know, stakeholders have things like IDs, and then they have first name, and they have like, I don't know, company name, right? And so the point is in GraphQL, like these things are all optional, right? So if I were writing like a UI, I could say that like, oh, the UI is gonna like, you click a button and it creates a stakeholder, maybe like a sign up button, right? And then the UI I show once the sign up is completed is like, you know, it gets to choose what it shows, right? Like it might show a first name, it might show a company name, it might use an ID internally, like this might be a, you know, programmatic identifier. But then like, okay, so then we want like create document. So let's do this, create document. And this is the same thing, right? A document has like a title and like a created date. I have no idea, right? I can't remember this stuff. And so my point is that like actually like owner is like stakeholder. So in this example, for us to actually create a document, we need a stakeholder. We need an owner of that document, right? And like that's expressed in make by just like, okay, well, to create a document, you first need a stakeholder, right? But because GraphQL is like everything about this resource that we've created is like optional, like I can't actually create this document unless this response at least has this thing, right? Like if I just put this in here, like that's not enough for me to do this. It's not enough for me to have just a stakeholder. I need its ID to do the work. So like in this example, right, we have document, and we do mutation, create, that's wrong, stakeholder, right? And then we need a document, we need a stakeholder, and we do mutation. mutation create document, right? Like that. But like I said, it's not just that we need a stakeholder. It's like we need like with ID. Like we need to like essentially kind of parameterize this recipe a little bit. We tell like, oh, this recipe, when you run, I know you already know how to create a stakeholder, but like I also need to tell you that you need this, like because I can't do it without that. Right. So anyway, like given this particular requirement, like that essentially downstream dependencies need to be able to tell upstream dependencies something. Like if programmatically you can think about it like while I'm executing this block, I need to know, things that downstream has told me it needs to do. Okay, so anyway, back to what we were talking about. If it weren't for this desire and need for us to sort of like have upstream, or depends on how you look at it, right? So this is upstream from that, right? If we didn't have this need for a downstream to sort of parameterize something upstream, I wouldn't even write a library, right? Like this is pointless, right? We could just use make, right? But like this kind of thing is actually not possible in make that I know of, and also make sucks, right? So we're just doing this for fun. Functional. Yeah, of course we are re-implementing make in TypeScript. Yes. So I mean it's make because I want something declarative like make, and I want something that you declare these things that you need and their dependencies of how they are created, like what order. But I can't use make, right? Because of this kind of thing. If you can, I don't know how, and honestly, I don't really want to. All right, so let's try to actually write some code. So I don't know what this API is going to look like. Oh, I was saying that I've already written this thing, and it like worked pretty well. It wasn't that long, but I lost the hard drive that it was on. I never backed it up. And I was like, oh, it's no big deal. Like, I even knew this. Like, when I lost the hard drive, I was like, there's some stuff on there I haven't, like, backed up. But, like, by backup, I mean I never, like, made a Git repository or uploaded it anywhere. And, like, I was like, but it's only a couple hundred lines. And now I'm, like, really regretting that. Because, I remember really liking what I had written, and now I can't remember anything. Okay. So let's try to write this thing. So we definitely need some kind of function, some kind of API to essentially create one of these, right? And so that thing needs to at least have some kind of name for itself, I guess, maybe for like debugging purposes. It of course needs to declare all of the stuff that it depends on, and then it also needs to declare how to make itself, right? So let's try that. Like, let's say function so we haven't figured out what these things are going to look like, but we can write those later. So let's kind of, just for like funsies, let's write this as if we were okay, so already we know we want something like this, right? And we know for certain that oh wait. So here's the deal, right? We need something like this where we have like a document. No, that's not right. It's a stakeholder. Man, I'm really struggling here. So this is a new keyboard. You know, I'm not usually this bad at typing, I swear. Okay, so we're happily doing this, right? We need some way to, again, like, so for now, what I'm going to do is something like this. Await, set timeout. Actually, I can't do it that way. We got to go new promise, resolve. We'll just wait like set timeout, resolve. So what I'm doing here is I'm just trying to like emulate some like slow request or something, right? So we'll just do a second, and then we'll return something with an ID. And then so for here, then we can do log stakeholder.id. So again, like what we really want is, this is in the wrong place. What we really want is some way to utilize this dependency while we're doing the work. And we also want some way for this guy, when it declares itself, to not only declare this as a dependency, but like say you need like with and then like ID. I'm not sure about this. We'll have to think about this more. In GraphQL land, obviously we don't want to declare strings like this. We probably want to declare like a fragment or something. And then, you know, we say stakeholder and ID. Like that would actually be the most ideal thing, I think. But I don't know. We'll have to figure that out later. Yeah. All right. So we already are starting to get some stuff going, right? Params equals that, and we want do work. So this is like some function that produces a promise of type T, and then we know we have a deps, which is like an array of recipes, right? And then we'll type recipe hello. Right? We don't know what this thing looks like, but we'll get there. We know it's one of these though. All right. And whoops. So thus far we have done absolutely nothing to parameters. We've just like taking it in and done the work. We just like duplicated the object, right? And so the idea is that given a recipe, we want to be able to say something like this: run recipe and then document. like this is the function we have to write. So, you know, given a bunch of these things that have dependencies, can we run this thing? Okay, yeah, so for those of you who are just joining, what we're trying to do here is we're basically writing a make clone. So, Notarize has this problem, and lots of companies have this problem where, like, sometimes you just want to run a bunch of requests. And really, I say requests, but it's even more generic than that. It's just like a bunch of asynchronous stuff, right? And some of those, so like, for instance, you may want an apple, right? And to get an apple, you first have to like make a seed and then plant the seed and then wait for the seed to grow and then water it and then, you know, all this stuff. And then eventually you get your tree, right? Because you're looking for the tree, and then, you know, you wait for the sun to come out and all this stuff. And then eventually you get the apple, right? You want this apple. And so there's this dependency graph you can draw there, right? So in make, this is like an example make request, right? Where like, oh, I want a C. I want to make a C, right? And to make a C, that's how I do it. But before I can make a C, I have to make both A and B. And here's how you make B, and here's how you make A, right? And these are dependency free, right? Like you don't need anything to make a B. You can just make it at any time. So more concretely, the way this manifests itself is like, oh, I want to run a bunch of requests against a server to like make that app in some state or produce some resource in some state. So we were using the example, this is from an old company that I used to work for, where like, oh, you want to upload a document and some person owns that document. So to upload the document, you first need to create the stakeholder, and to create a stakeholder, this is how you make the stakeholder, right? And so you could just use make, right? Like there's nothing stopping you from like putting like a make file and then putting like curl requests here. Like that's completely fine. But I wanted two things. I definitely want something that's a little bit less shitty than make. And it also has some requirements that I don't think we can satisfy with make. So one thing that's special for us is when we create the stakeholder, it's not just that to create a document you need a stakeholder. It's that we need the document to be able to essentially like notify the stakeholder recipe about particulars of the dependency. So it's not just that document needs a stakeholder, it's that it also needs a stakeholder's ID. So in this case, like I can't create a document unless I have an owner, and the owner is like that stakeholder's ID, right? So I don't think you can write this kind of thing, like this parameterization of like upstream recipes in make, but maybe you can. You can do a lot of stuff in make, but like I don't know if you can do this. And if you can, it's probably like super esoteric and like impossible to do and documented poorly and doesn't work on certain platforms or whatever. Who knows? So what I would really like is we're just going to use JavaScript, right? And we're using JavaScript because everybody knows how to write JavaScript. The people who are going to be writing these recipes at Notarize are very comfortable with JavaScript. So like essentially this function, we're going to write this function and we're going to write this function. We're going to write two functions. So this one is equivalent to making like one of these, right? And then this one is equivalent to saying like make C, right, on the command line. Yes, Andy, that's a perfect example of bootstrapping a dev environment. We want to use it primarily for test setup. So like things like, you know, like creating accounts and then like signing in with those accounts, and then like maybe like uploading a document to notarize.com, and then like maybe adding some annotations to that document, and then like once that is ready to go, then like you know going somewhere with that, right? You can also use it for like QA, right? So like if you want to, like sometimes it can take, like a Notarize, for instance, some of the documents that we deal with are like real estate documents, you know, like mortgage documents. So essentially, it's like, 50-page documents, and every single document has like tons of signatures and like lots of places on the document to put signatures. So to like prep that by hand, with a mouse and keyboard, or even automated browsers, right, is like extremely slow. So like with this kind of thing, we can like do it in seconds, right? Extremely efficiently. You can do it in Make. I should have known that you would know if you can do it in Make. I feel like you know everything about Make there is to know. Yeah, this is not like a super unique problem, right? And that's why I want to open source it, right? I basically want to open source the library that is this function and this function. And I think that if we make it sort of declarative like this, where you just say, this is how I make a document, and then these are the things I need to make a document, like this function can like do all this work, like all this basically dependency graph introspection to like make sure this is as efficient as possible, right? It can run things in parallel. It can basically utilize sorry, I was thinking about something else. It can basically make this process of producing a document as like fast as possible, as efficient as possible. You could even potentially, I was actually thinking about this. I'm not concerned about this right now, but you could even use this for some basic profiling, like backend performance, right? So like it's very easy for me to like add an argument like, and essentially all this would do is every time it does like a recipe, it can like, tell me how long the work function takes. And so you could like, I don't know, have like a fucking for loop or maybe like, 1,000 of these things, right? And it'll just run all these in parallel, right? It'll make, in this case, 10 documents at once. And so by turning the profile on, you can essentially say like, oh, like how fast does, I'm not so sure about this particular use case because profiling is tricky. But it's easy. It's trivial for me to add like a timer.start and a timer.end after every, do work and then print how many milliseconds, right? There's lots of stuff you can do with this. Like it turns out that Make is like really useful, right? Yes. So I want do work to be just an async function, right? So you could do whatever you want in here, including interact with HTTP. You could interact. So my company uses GraphQL, which is essentially is HTTP, but that's the fact that we use GraphQL is where this requirement comes from. Because like in Graph, like for us to create a document, essentially, like in this example here, like we have to tell this mutation, oh, you have to put an ID in there. That's where this requirement comes from. Is literally because of Graph, I guess. In more like REST APIs, right? Like you probably wouldn't have to do this, or at least you might, right? Because like, for instance, it could be like a query argument on the REST API to like return some additional information that you need or whatever to create this downstream resource. Essentially, that's what I'm saying is like, oh, to create a document, I need, when you create the stakeholder, for you to add like a query arg. I need you to say like include ID, right? Like that's what I need. So I'm already like displeased with this. We need a way to like, do we just do this instead? That's probably it. So this can't be an array anymore, but that's okay. Yeah. So back to your original question, is it just HTTP? Yeah, yes, but like, you know, you could do whatever you want in here. You could, I don't know, query a database or whatever you need to do. Response code pattern matching. I don't know what you mean. All right, let's keep going here. So I think there's already a constraint on this, which is whether we like it or not, which is that I'm not sure, which is that this has to be all declarative and like named at the get-go, right? Like this isn't, there's no API to extend the recipe, make it like higher order, right? So like it's not as if during the work we can add more work, right? Like that doesn't exist, right? Like you finish, you produce your document, and then that's all you're allowed to do, right? Which is probably a good thing for my particular use case, but I could see why some people wouldn't like that. The advantage is, of course, it makes it way simpler, right? So some people are probably more recently joining than others, but what we're actually working in here is we've got this man, this is not easy to read, but oh, I guess we could do it like this, packages. So we have this cool thing where we're going to write the core library, right? And oh, I need to hide that. That shouldn't be there. We can fix that later. We're going to write the core library, which is just like the thing that's make recipe and run recipe, right? And then we're going to write a slightly higher level library that depends on this, where you're going to say something like make GraphQL recipe, right? And internally, that's just going to call make recipe. But like the idea is that it makes it a little bit more ergonomic to work with GraphQL requests. And the idea is that like I think people are really interested. Got locked out of comments. I'm sorry to hear that, man. Do you want me to tech support you some more? Like. The idea is that like, oh, we can make another package for, I think that, Andy, you're really interested in like SQL, right? Like imagine like a Postgres, right? Package where you have not just make recipe, but you have make Postgres recipe, right? And then so that it makes it really ergonomic to just write the work where your work is Postgres SQL, right? So we definitely will not get here tonight. We won't get that far. We'll be lucky if we finish this, because at this point, we're going so slow. But it's fun, we're having a good time. All right. So I'm gonna actually start to write some tests, because that way I can just like execute the code quickly. So I'm actually gonna take this stuff and move it over, because we'll just put it in here. So we have to export this thing, export, and we also have to export this, and this is going to be our run recipe. And this takes a recipe. Okay, and this is also an async function. So let's make sure this works. I'm just testing that my fucking test work because I haven't done this yet. Okay, so let's see. This is an async test, and we await last result. We can even just say this: expect, await, run recipe. What is it? Document here. To be. I'll just put a couple O's here to make sure this test fails. Man, this keyboard. Holy moly. I'm definitely not used to this. Okay. Run. Test. Watch. Pretty good. Oh, look. Our tests failed, and that's a good thing. That's what we wanted. Okay, and now it passed. All right. I really wish there was a way. I'm pretty sure there is. I don't know. We'll have to figure that out later. So usually, and maybe I will do this anyway, usually, so I try to be a little bit lazy, and I just had TypeScript directly compile my JavaScript, or directly compile this source, but you don't necessarily, that was just so I have one less tool, but most people I think who do this, they actually use Babel, and then Babel will always emit the code. And then TypeScript just becomes your little, essentially a fancy linter, right? Which is really what I want. I want to be able to quickly prototype these things without having to deal with type errors. Yeah. So I think James is asking about what's the best way to handle errors, right? Or more specifically, what's the elegant way, given a 200 status code for the stakeholder, to say oh, here's. So I think in this API design, all of that is handled in the work of stakeholder, right? So stakeholder would here do a request, and then given that request response code of 200, it would return it this way. Maybe request code of 400, it might do a retry, right, of some variety, right? You essentially have with the promise you have indefinite amount of time, right? And if you really can't satisfy it, right, you get a 500 or you've retried 3 times or whatever it is, I think you can just throw, right? And so our make recipe, our run recipe, I should say, if at any point it's it's resolving all these resources, if at any point it gets an error, it just stops, right, and prints the error, right? That's fine. That's what make does, right? If you say make A, and then in the process of making A, it errors somewhere, it just stops, right? You don't get an A. I think that's okay. All right, let's keep going. So we got to write this function. This is like the hard part, right? So I think one thing we may want to do is, like, essentially we get a recipe. It may have some dependencies. Those may have some dependencies, et cetera, et cetera. So we kind of need a way to, like, recursively, I guess, search this graph and, like, pull out all the things we will eventually need to build, right? And then once we know all that, then we can, like, sort that and just put it in the order that makes sense, right? Like, so do all the things that require no dependencies first, right? And if we were being really, really fancy, right, like, there's probably a way to do this a little bit better. But the way I was envisioning this is we would do, like, rounds, right? So the first round is like so for every round, we just do all of the resources that the dependencies currently have been satisfied for, right? So the first round is always going to be, all of the dependencies that all of the recipes that don't have any dependencies, right? And then after that, once you've satisfied all those, then you can go through again and then find all the ones that, have dependencies that are the only those, right? And then you can go again and again. And you can just, like, keep doing this until you run out of things to do, right? And that's when you know you're done. I don't know. I'm not sure. It's probably possible. Like, so I think that like these, like, make recipe and run recipe are really low level, right? And I think what you're actually saying is, like, oh, I want a make level that's, like, or a make recipe that's pretty high level and that, like, does really, really well when your recipes are HTTP, right? And those status codes from the response are, like, super important to me in how I do my work, right? So we could imagine, like, another library that, like, internally calls make recipe, right? But externally it provides this nice API, this elegant API for, writing this function, right? I think that's a totally reasonable request, right? I mean, essentially, that's exactly what I want to do eventually for GraphQL, right? I don't want people to have to write make recipe directly because the do work is, like, not, it's fine, but it's, like, very boilerplatey. You're going to be writing a lot of the same code over and over. Like, really, for GraphQL, like, all you want to do is specify what you need and what you're sending in, right? Like, output, input. And so, like, if we just have, like, a make recipe where you basically just write this and, like, this, it's like, that's great. That's what we want. But by the way, like, I mean, 100% understand your concern because, like, I think if you want people to use something like this, you should make it really easy to write recipes, right? And that's that's sort of the desire I'm expressing by, like, I want people to, like, write like this, but even this is, like, even too much, right? Like, this is like, you're gonna have to write this no matter what in some shape, and, like, this is, like, super tedious. So it's like, how can we make, input and output really, really elegant, right, for your particular use case, right? So I think, Andy was talking about before, for, like, SQL or whatever, it's like, well, the input and output for SQL is, like, there's some API that looks really nice for that, and maybe that API is SQL, right? Like, so maybe you have, like a make SQL recipe, right? And, like, in here you just like, select star, like, I don't know, right? Like this is a really, really elegant API, right? And then internally, I guess you need at least depths, right? Right, so like you have to do this other query first, but then you can do this one, right? And so like internally you can like examine this string and like parse it, you know, find all the things about this query string, and then like internally this thing will write this function for you. Yeah, that's true. Okay, let's keep going. All right. Okay, so we can just like, so these recipes don't have IDs, but I can give them one, right? And this is just so that I can like reference them, right? Sort of uniquely. And I can say const all style. Maybe we want like a collection of uncompleted and a collection of completed, right? So right now there's like none, right? And then uncompleted is, this is going to be new set, and this is all depths, right? All recipes. And so we can just, you know, traverse the graph to get this, right? So let's just do that. Let's just do it this way, I guess. So what's my recipe look like? Okay, so each one has an ID. So we can say like I feel like I'm doing this twice for some reason, but okay. And then we can say traversed dot add. Is it add? Is it set? I don't know. Oh, right. I know what to do here. We can do it this way. Set of symbol, I think is how you write this. I don't know. I'm not sure if that's how you write this. Okay, and then you say if recipe dot or traversed dot has recipe dot ID, we can like stop, right? Right, otherwise we add. And we also have to accumulate our result, right? So somewhere we have to accumulate this result. I guess traversed is the accumulation. So, you know, actually it really is like, I'm not a huge fan of this, but whatever. And then we say for is it object.keys or something? values. That's what we want. Recipe.deps for each. Then we call traverse. Oh, we have to do it this way though. Dep traverse. So dep and then traversed. I think that's it. I think that's all we have to do. For later, can we restrict the type of do work and make recipe for a specific type, or is it desired for the type to be unbound? That's an excellent question. So I don't have a good answer for that right now. I mean, so yes, you can certainly restrict the type. And in fact, we want to. Because essentially the type of that is going to, like over here in the receiver, you know, we're going to get that thing and it's going to have like certain properties. Like the shape of it, the type of it is like very specific. You're totally right. Like this do work promise of T has to be like, it's a generic, right? But one thing that's tricky about that restriction is, again, back to this requirement here. Is like, well, actually, its shape is like so polymorphic, right? Because like, well, it's not just like the stakeholder recipe can't specify the type because its type is actually dependent on who uses it, right? Because like, oh, in here it's actually a stakeholder with an ID, but like, you know, we could imagine another case with the document to, you know, with name, I don't know, something like this, and with ID. You know, like in this example, like actually stakeholder has two different shapes, and this thing, like at definition time, can't possibly know all the shapes. So like, the problem is like, this is a compile time value, like what the shape of T is, and I don't think you can, I'm not sure, I have to think about it more, but I don't think you can determine that type at compile time. I think it's actually a runtime value. Because essentially at runtime, you're going to say, oh, document 2 needs stakeholder with these two props. You can definitely give type constraints as well. You can say that, like, you know, T is a function or a string, or you can definitely do that. Like, at least, I should say, I think is really what you, like, I think they call them type constraints in TypeScript. I'm not really sure. I mean, again, like, I'm not super, I wouldn't be even upset if like TypeScript doesn't provide any value other than like making sure these parameters are correct. Like we may not be able to type these. That's fine. Like we may only be able to type like this and this. There is actually something very interesting here that's like, well, you actually know all the keys of this because they're all the keys of that. So you probably could even do that. Like you could make sure that like, oh, stakeholder is a key, but I'm not sure. I'm still not sure about like, oh, stakeholder is a key and it has an ID. I'm not really sure. All right, did we finish this? Is this done? Does this work? So I don't really like this part where we like pass this mutable object and then we just like keep mutating it, but it is what it is, right? So like if I console log, yeah, that'll work. Uncompleted. And then I just run my tests like, apparently symbol's not a name. We'll just put, that's fine. I don't actually care that much. Oh wow, I'm really a good person. grammar. Okay, it's oh, well, that's not helpful. It's just a set of symbols. We didn't want that. So maybe this has to be a map. You can do like IDs too. So you can say, use the recipe. That's all you need to change, right? Oh, I need to change this too. What do you mean it doesn't exist? How can that be possible? Is that really not? Is it like something else? Clear entries get, so it's set. Unbelievable. You were right, TypeScript. You were right. Okay. All right. This is looking pretty good. So in our example, this function is working correctly because we only have 2 pieces of work and we got 2 items in this map. Stop trying to hack my computer, guys. Please, please. Keep it to a dull roar. All right. So now that we have all of the uncompleted work, we can just keep like emptying this thing until we it's like uncompleted size. I guess not size. No, size. That's right. So we can say round equals an empty array. And round, right? So we're going to collect the work we need to be doing, and then we'll just do all of it at once, right? So this is our parallelism right here. And then we need to find all the work, right? So we say for I mean, conceivably, by the way, you know, we could actually compute all the rounds at once, I guess. Like, you actually know it all, right? And that's what I was saying here is that one constraint of this API is that, like, you can't ever, like, add more work in the middle, right? Everything is declared up front, and then that's all you get. But actually, the way that this is written here, we're like, oh, we could just, like, somehow keep adding work to uncompleted. Like, it might actually work, but I don't want to mess with that. I don't want to get involved. So work of uncompleted if all depths done of work, and let's say this is recipe, right? Oh, I don't want to we can say, so actually, let's just write it this way. Uncompleted dot map. Does that actually work? I don't know. I don't want to mess with that. Like, I don't know these these APIs in JavaScript to go from, I don't really use maps and sets that much for some reason. I don't know, they're just not my thing. Okay, so then we can say round.push, and we'll just write this function real quick, right? And once we've like determined the round, we also have to say round for each work. We have to remove. I guess I can do that here, right? We have to remove work from uncompleted. But this is a bit weird because we're like mutating something that we're like iterating over. So maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe I just want to do it down here. For each work. And then we want to say uncompleted dot remove, or is it delete? It's probably delete. Work.id. We have to write this other function too. Function, all depths done, take a recipe, and return a bold. I can just leave it like that. What's going on here? Lots of stuff is happening. What are you talking about? Huh? Okay, so I'm just also going to print console.log round. Like as we're doing this stuff, we'll just find out if it's working. So in our example, we only have two things. So we should see stakeholder printed, and then we should see document printed, like an array of one thing twice. And that's it. That's all. That's all. So how do we know if all the dependencies are done? We also need to take completed new set. No, what am I doing? I'm being foolish here. Set of unknown. Return object dot values of recipe dot depths, right? So for each one, we would just want to say, is it all? Every. That's what it is in JavaScript. So if every dep completed has dep.id. I think that's right. I've also realized that we need to do this too, right? Completed dot add work.id. Conceivably, we should do this after, right? I think we're almost done with this code. I think this is like done. So, like this is not the cleanest code, and there might be some bugs in it still, but like I think this is the entire library, right? Like there's really nothing else to do. There's like one thing here, which is like you have to return something at the end from the last recipe. Maybe the last recipe to be executed tells you the work that it computed or something. But like we're like done with make, right? Like that part is over. What's interesting that we still haven't done is we still haven't done this part, this like parameterization, and so like here when we produce the round and we like do the work, oh, this is actually bad, right? This is not right. We have to call like round dot, do work for every single work. We have to like pass in some stuff to that do work function. We got to do that here. So this is actually not done. I was wrong. But it's getting close, right? Like we have the core algorithm, right? That's all we really need. So it's something like this actually, right? Map work. We're gonna say work dot do work. Something like this, I think. All right, let's run the damn thing. Let's see what happens. Oh, it's oh god. I think we might have an infinite loop. Oh, this might be from before though, because I think this was just running in the background and it may have had an infinite loop from before. Maybe we'll just do this just to be safe. Yeah, we'll kill this thing. Yeah. Okay. Hopefully we don't have any more infinite loops now. Okay, it doesn't compile. So we know that infinite loop comes from before. All right, that's good. It's saying that ID does not exist on any. I don't have an any. Roundup push work uncompleted. Oh, so this is probably one of those things. It's like it's probably both the key and the value, right? So I think it's like this: work equals. Just call it iter for now. Object is of type unknown. Oh, that's nice. This is a one-liner. I'm just gonna move it here. I don't feel like dealing with that. It still doesn't like it. Why not? Why not? Like it's okay. It's okay, TypeScript. You're fine. Oh, so I think it's actually complaining about dep itself. So what is this? This is a deps, so we don't actually know. Man, I don't care, man. Just go. So this is like, I should have had all this boilerplate done before I started programming. Okay, I think I could just go like this. Oh, we still have an infinite loop. What are we gonna do? Well, first of all, we should kill our program. I need to learn how to type on this keyboard because this is horrible. This is real bad. So presumably this is the infinite loop. I don't think this can be infinite. Well, I know that we can just do this. I don't know. There's something I've been thinking about lately is that, like, you know, coding is like not that important to like what I do. Like what I mean by that is like it feels good to be like heads down and be coding all day, but the older I get, the more I realize that like it's not that important. Like things, the value we deliver to the company is so much more than that. And like if I only dedicate 30% of my time to coding, like that's fine. You know, like it may not be fine to me. Like I might, as an individual, choose that I don't like that. And so like that would be something to like work with your manager about, or like, you know, maybe find another job or something. But for me, I mean, the older I get, like I complain about it constantly, how I have like no uninterrupted time. But at the same time, I love it. Like I love being out there. I love like talking to customers, like learning about the product, defining like the requirements, like mentoring people. Like I fucking love that stuff. Like I actually, like coding is like not that important to me anymore. All right, let's try to fix this code. What happened? How did we mess this up? We're deleting work. We're doing it. How can this never get to 0? Unless it's not size? I don't even know, man. How'd this happen? How could this possibly happen? Do we just debug this? Is it break? I think it's break. So we'll just do one loop, right? I just want to print console.log round. Oh, we already did that. We'll just do this then. I just want to see what completed and uncompleted look like. Okay. The round is empty. What? So this must be wrong. Well, that's why it's infinite. We never do any work. What happened? That's a mistake. Okay. This feels better. This feels much better. Okay, should we try it? Let's try it for real. What was it again? While uncompleted.size. All right, we did it. We did it, boys.
And girls.
And girls. Well, girls specifically. So we're trying to make this an inclusive environment. Grace is right. Select all, delete. All right. Look at all these threads, man. Whoa. So many threads. All right. So this is an exception because we don't pass anything into do work, which is what I was saying. So we need to pass some stuff here. At the bare minimum, I think we can do this to just make it work. But this is gonna throw, so I'll just do this. Oops. Hello. All right. So the thing works, kind of. So one thing I'm realizing is we probably want to save the result of the work so that we can like pass it in. So completed can actually just be, instead of like the set of done work, it can be the map of done work to the work that was the result, right? We can actually do that. Whoops. Man. Okay. So then we say set work ID equal to all right, and let's actually return that. Completed. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, look at that. So we got some symbol and the result was an ID. And then we got another thing which had undefined. Is that, yeah, we didn't return anything here, so that makes sense. All right, so we have saved some work, and then we can actually populate this thing given completed. We can do that. We can do that now. Let's do that. steps dot reduce dep. We can go like this, right? Vacuum, and then all right, we have to say something like object entries. So it's not really that, it's a key and then a thing with an ID, right? Something like this. Oh, and we need an accum, which we don't have yet. Accum. So then key is what? It's completed at ID. We have to start it with something. All right, and then we can go like this. I think that's it. Oh, we got like stuff. Oh, by Lanta. Whoa, what is happening here? Oh, wait. Let's make this a little easier to read here. That's why we're missing a parens. God, I'm such a good programmer. Such a good. Like, you get used to, like, when you're at work and you like work on the same code base every single day, you get used to like the tools you have, the mechanics of it all. Like I don't have any of that here. Like I don't have an auto formatter, I don't have a linter, nothing. So I'm just like freeballing it here. Like we've done it. All right, so let's see what happens. Oh, stop. Stop, stop, stop. Can we just say as any? Does it work? On line 93, do I still have the syntax error? Yeah, I do. Okay. Completed. I don't actually care, man. Just keep going. Just keep going. We're gonna have to fix this at some point, but not right now. We ain't doing that. Which expression is it? Element implicitly is any type because expression of type any can be used in index type map of any. Oh. Sometimes TypeScript is smarter than me. To be honest with you, since we're just using maps, we didn't even use sets, we should just use regular objects. That way this will run in like older browsers and all kinds of stuff. We should just change this. Like, we shouldn't use these. Like, it's not going to be any faster or anything. It's, part of this is like, I don't really like these mutable objects and stuff, so we'll change this a little later. All right. Are we done? Can we end this? I want to console log this and see what this looks like. This is like kind of right, but not really. This is wrong. This is wrong. Oh. Wow. We're really, really smart people here. See, if we were using TypeScript, we would have told me that. But we're not. We're just keep putting any's everywhere. All right, this is better. This is what we want to see. Look, we did it. It's a working program. And this now prints ID, which is what we want. Look at that. Stakeholder ID. We did it. We did it, boys and girls.